My name is Scott Jowett. I don't currently work in frontline services, but until recently I did for about 15 years, just over. I worked in Hope House, which is a very large homeless hostel for adults in Portsmouth. And while I was a team leader there, a couple of times we had some very bad heroin going around. Some of it was laced with fentanyl, so we went for a spate of overdoses and injecting people with naloxone and things quite regularly. The first time I was terrified because I kind of thought that if something horrible was going to go wrong, I would kind of be responsible for it somehow. I thought I was going to kill someone by accident. After doing it a few times, very quickly just became sort of emotionally disconnected and desensitized to it. It's probably the most sort of traumatic event that I've been through was when a young man, when I worked in young people services, he'd fallen from a third-storey window, and I was on New Year's Eve of all the times of the world, and I was the first responder. I found him, called the emergency services, and dealt with that. Yeah, weirdly at the time, just so adrenaline fueled that you're just so very present in the present moment. Don't really know what I was feeling or going through at the time, but I know that it had a massive effect on me in my life onwards from that point. I've been verbally abused countless times, as everyone has. I think you kind of expect that as part of the role. It's not something to be taken personally, it's just something that happens, and I've been physically assaulted more than once. It's a tough one because in one sense you are emotionally disconnected from it. It's not about you, it's them living in their own trauma response, if you like. Their behaviour, their circumstances, that moment is all a result of traumatic events. So in one sense it's hard to distance yourself from it, but on the other hand you can't stop it from having an effect and affecting you personally. So I tended to kind of disassociate and disconnect from it in the immediate effect, and then it would upset me later on when I've gone home and there's no one else around. It tended to be quite upsetting then. A long time ago, I did feel like my life was at risk when a gentleman with some rather severe complex mental health needs, he tried to, after speaking to the ghost of Lee Rigby, he tried to scalp himself, and then he chased me through the building with these blood-stained knives. So I locked myself in the office and felt genuinely afraid for my life that night. I think the leading factors for stress and burnout are a lack of specialised support in service. So to feel like in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event at work, to have someone to talk to who understands trauma, who understands how it can affect someone, who understands how everyone is affected by these things in different ways, that would be really useful, because the current setup with most of these organisations is that they have the employee assistance programme, which is very remote and distanced. Your team leader, your manager, they can often be really good and supportive in terms of they want what's best for you, but they're not really trained to deal with that kind of stuff. So I feel like the best way to deal with these things would be to have someone in situ who specialises in dealing with the effects of trauma. I'm involved in a lot of creative projects in my life, and if I didn't have those, I don't think I would be sitting here today. My love for music and filmmaking and all of these things are what led me to quit working in that line of work, because I just realised that it was consuming my life. I was working crazy shifts, long shifts, waking up, preparing for work, getting home, preparing for bed and going to work, and I had no creative outlet, so I quit so I could work a gentler kind of job and pursue my creative interests, which keep me going. quite often in these services, especially if you're short-staffed, you can quite often bounce from traumatic event to traumatic event to traumatic event to supervision to traumatic event to so having a space, a calm, chilled-out space to just debrief and de-stress for a little while, that would be really useful, and that's very rare to exist. All the organisations that I've worked for, like Two Saints, SSJ, they have become very large organisations that operate in a very corporate manner and have become very distant from why they were set up in the first place, to support homeless people, and they run like very large businesses, and if they're not careful, the whole tender process and the way that these things are funded, and they're just going to hit a brick wall, and they're going to find that they're not going to be able to run the way that they do. With every tender comes a lack of reduction in staffing, reduction in funding. So if they want to retain their staff, if they want to be able to keep doing what they do, they need to invest in their staff.